1% rule. Set aside 1% of your purchase price for maintenance every year. For most of North America, that's a fairly reasonable starting point, but in Toronto, it isn't, and it's wrong in the specific way that it actually costs you. I'm Jamie, I'm a broker at Bosley Real Estate, and I'm going to walk you through every major system in a typical East York semi, what each one costs, how long it's gonna last, and what it all adds up to per year. So by the end, you have a real number, not a rule of thumb, a number that you can plan around. The 1% rule gives you a dollar amount. And for most of North America, that dollar amount kind of tracks with what a house actually costs to maintain. The logic made sense when the rule was invented. A more expensive house was more expensive because it was bigger or newer or better built. Price and physical replacement cost moved together. Toronto broke that relationship. When you buy a $1.3 million semi in East York, you're not buying $1.3 million worth of house. You're actually buying roughly $598,000 worth of house and $702,000 worth of land. That land figure, which is about 54% of your purchase price, comes from an implication from Statistic Canada's national balance sheet data. And that land will never need a furnace or never need a new roof. But the 1% rule charges you maintenance on all of it. The rule feels responsible because it's proportional. Bigger purchase, bigger reserve. That logic makes sense for financial assets, more money at risk, more money that you set aside. But here's the thing, a house isn't a financial asset in the maintenance sense, it's a physical object. And physical objects deteriorate based on age and use and condition, not based on what somebody paid for the land underneath them. A furnace doesn't know what you paid for the lot. And I'll be upfront about something. I'm a realtor, I benefit when people buy houses, which is exactly why I'd rather build the math in front of you than ask you to take my word for it. So let's do that. This matters most in markets where land value has kind of become disconnected from structure value, which is exactly what's happened in Toronto over the last, let's call it 15 years. If you're buying in a city where a $1.3 million house is $1.3 million because of what's built on it, the 1% rule is a rough but workable approximation. If you're buying in Toronto, where that same price is more land premium than anything, then the rule is calculating maintenance on an asset that doesn't have maintenance costs. I used to teach high school science and math, and the first thing that you learn about solving any problem is that you have to be measuring the right thing. The 1% rule measures price. Maintenance costs don't care about price. They care about physical condition and age of stuff and square footage. You're trying to solve for the right answer using the wrong variable. Here's what that actually produces. 1% of 1.3 million is $13,000 a year. 13 grand for 1,000 to 1,400 square foot semi in East York. Now, in my experience, what I watch happen is that buyers think about putting that much aside and then quietly don't save anything, not because they're irresponsible, because the number feels disconnected from the house that they're actually looking at. And the data backs this up. A 2025 bank rate study found that 42% of homeowners with regrets cited maintenance and hidden costs coming in higher than expected, the number one reason on their list. The rule produced a number too high to believe, so people planned with nothing instead. And they're correct, by the way, it is too high, and I get into that a bit later in this video. That's why we need a different number, one built from the actual systems in the house, not the price that's on the offer sheet. Now, I've put together a free guide. It's called the 2-account setup. It's the full system breakdown and account structure from this video. You'll find the link in the description below. Now, here's the thing. Even if you already know that the 1% rule is wrong, there's a second problem hiding underneath it. And this one isn't mathematical, it's behavioral. When people hear set aside money for house maintenance, they picture one pool of money, one account, one number, one category, and that feels organized until something breaks. There are actually two completely different financial obligations hiding inside that single number. They behave differently, they serve different purposes, and the moment you combine them, one of them fairly consistently disappears. First one is capital replacement. This is the money for your roof, your furnace, your AC, your windows, your sewer line. These systems will fail, not maybe, definitely. They have rated lifespans and they will hit the end of them, maybe while you're the owner of the house. The money for capital replacement isn't really savings, if you will. It's more like a debt you're paying before it's due. You're not setting money aside for something you might want, you're setting money aside for something you will likely owe. The second is routine annual maintenance. This is the money that gets spent every year on schedule, whether or not anything breaks. Eaves trough cleaning, furnace and AC maintenance, this money is expected to leave that account. That's what it's there for. When these two buckets share an account, the capital replacement portion starts to feel flexible. You do a $400 repair in October, the account has money in it that you pull from, nothing catastrophic happens, so you do it again in March and again in the summer. But here's the thing. The moment the money has two jobs, it stops doing the important one. Every time you dip into the capital account for a routine repair, you're not just spending $400, you're reducing the buffer that exists for the day that your furnace dies in January or your sewer backs up on a Sunday night. This becomes critical the moment you move from a condo to a house. And I know this transition fairly well. I sold my own condo at Yonge and Eglinton in 2023. In a condo, your maintenance fee does this separation on your behalf. The building's reserve fund is the capital account and the operating budget is the routine account. You never had to think about it because the condo corporation thought about it for you, but the house doesn't come with that infrastructure. You have to build it yourself. And if you don't do it deliberately on day one, the capital account gets quietly rated by routine expenses until the day something major fails and the money isn't there. Two numbers, two accounts, two different rules. That's the setup that actually works. And the specific numbers for each bucket come from the systems in the house, not from a percentage of what you paid, which means we need to go system by system and build the real figure from the ground up. Typical East York semi, somewhere between 1,000 and 1,400 square feet above grade, probably built somewhere between 1910 and 1930. This is the house that keeps showing up in the $1.2 to $1.4 million range in pockets like Leslieville or Danforth and Woodbine. Good bones for the most part, and systems that are aging on a schedule, whether you're paying attention or not. What you're looking at right now is every major system in a house like this, what each one costs to replace, how long it lasts, and what it adds up to per year. Two things to keep in mind while you're looking it over. First, the age, 90 to 110 years old. And I don't say that the way people say it when they mean a house has character. I mean that some of what's on that table isn't approaching the end of its lifespan. It's already past it multiple times over in some cases. Some systems have been updated along the way. Some haven't been touched. You're not always buying something that's aging. Sometimes you're buying something that's already past due. Second, there are two different types of costs inside that table. There's planned replacement. You're inheriting a brand new roof, count on getting a new one in, let's call it 15 to 20 years. And then there's deferred maintenance work that the previous owner didn't do that now lands on your timeline. Electrical, plumbing, water supply. In a home of that typical vintage, those items are common. And if the house has a rear addition with a flat roof, which a lot of East York semis do, that sits on its own replacement cycle on top of everything else. Let's put this together. The capital bucket, planned replacement, deferred maintenance, both of them lands at approximately $6,000 to $8,000 a year for a home of this vintage. The routine bucket, the things that get spent every year on schedule, whether or not anything breaks, adds another $2,000 to $2,500. So the full number built from the actual systems in the house is $8,000 to $10,500 a year. The 1% rule on this purchase would have told you $13,000. That gap is real. That's $2,500 to $5,000 a year that you didn't need to be saving or spending. But here's the more important thing that the rule can't give you. It's the split. Which portion goes into the capital account and never gets touched? Which portion gets spent every year on schedule? That split is what makes the number usable, and you can't get that from a percentage. If you're the kind of person who runs the numbers before making a decision, and if you've gotten this far in the video, you definitely are, this is the number that actually matters. Not a rule of thumb someone invented for a different market, the built number from the actual systems in the actual house. I've watched buyers walk away from good houses because things like a 14-year-old furnace showed up on the inspection report, and I get it. On paper, it looks like bad news, but there's one more thing that this approach gives you that the rule never does. A flagged system becomes a scheduled expense. When the inspection comes back and says the furnace is 14 years old or whatever, that's not necessarily a reason to walk away. That's a replacement arriving in 1 to 3 years. And now you can price it into the offer, you can build it into your capital account and be ready for it. An unflagged failure is a crisis. The houses that have genuinely hurt people, in my experience, aren't the ones with flagged systems. They're the ones where everything is inspected, comes back clean, and then something failed 18 months in that wasn't visible on the inspection day. Know the difference before you walk away from a solid house over a replaceable furnace, for example. And this is where the math stops being abstract, because there's a specific timing window in the next 2 to 3 years where a major system failure stops being an inconvenience and becomes a genuine financial crisis. If you're buying because a family is part of the plan, this is the section that matters the most. Most people watching this can follow the math in real time, not a big deal. But when you're standing in a house in a showing with like 30 minutes and an emotional decision to make, the numbers aren't in front of you anymore. That's the gap that the 2-account setup guide closes. It's a reference with every system for this video, the annualized contribution for each, and the 2-account structure pre-built so that you can walk into a purchase with the capital and routine numbers already separated and funded from day one. The people who use it don't have to do this math under pressure, and that's the difference between planning and reacting. Link is in the description. There's a version of the buying a house story that has a timing problem built right into it, and it doesn't show up on any kind of mortgage calculator. You buy a house because you need the space. You need the space because a family is the plan. And that plan is on a timeline that doesn't wait for perfect market conditions. So if you're buying in East York because you need room for a growing family, that's not a hypothetical, that is the plan. Which means the real stress test for this purchase isn't, can we afford it on our current income? The stress test is, can we afford it when one of us is on leave? Here's how that math works. On a combined household income of $300,000, you're both making around $150,000. A $1,040,000 mortgage at 4.25% fixed with a 25-year amortization produces a monthly payment of approximately $5,612. That number doesn't change because you had a baby. Under 2026 federal EI rules, the partner on leave receives roughly $37,000, let's call it $38,000 for the year. That's 55% of insurable earnings, capped at roughly $729 a week. So the household income goes from $300,000 combined to, let's call it $188,000 for the 12-month leave. That's the higher earner's full income plus one partner's EI, again, assuming that you each made $150,000. That's a 37% income reduction against a fixed $5,600 monthly payment. That is a margin where a $7,000 furnace or a $10,000 sewer line stops being an expense and becomes a crisis. And here's what makes it worse. The systems most likely to fail aren't the ones you replaced last year. They're the ones that are already aging when you bought. A furnace that was 12 years old at closing is 14 years old when the leave starts. A hot water tank that inspected as functional is now 2 years closer to the end of its rated lifespan. The capital account you built before closing is what turns a $7,000 furnace from a crisis into a line item. Not a rainy day fund, not a HELOC you're hoping to qualify for when your household income just dropped by 37%, a dedicated capital account funded on a schedule starting before the first mortgage payment clears. I've had clients who bought without separating the capital account, genuinely organized people, good savers. They got hit with a major repair in year 2 or 3, not because they were careless, but because they had one account, it was full, it felt like they had enough, and then the money had already been spent on things that felt urgent at the time. The capital account needs to exist before the leave starts. It cannot be built during it. So what does the actual setup look like? The account structure, the monthly transfer amounts, how to get this in place before closing day, that's what's next. 2 accounts, not one. That's the whole system. The capital account, your reserve for planned replacement and deferred maintenance, gets funded first and touched last. Based on that build, that's somewhere in the range of $500 to $670 a month, depending on what the house presents. The routine account covers what gets spent every year on schedule. That's about $170 to $210 a month. The eaves trough cleaning, the HVAC maintenance, the small repairs that just happen, that money is expected to leave the account, and that's what it's there for. And the rule for the capital account is the same regardless of which number you land on. It does not get touched for routine expenses, not ever. If you find yourself pulling from that account for something that's routine, that's a signal your routine contribution is too low, not a reason to raid the capital account. The goal isn't to spend less on your house. The goal is to know exactly what you're spending, put it in the right account before you need it, and never be in a position where a furnace failing in January is a financial emergency. The number is real. The system is what makes it workable. If you've already watched my video on the 5 costs that will shock you when you buy a house in Toronto, this is the full version of cost number 4 and a little bit of cost number 5 from that video. If you haven't seen it yet, that's the one to watch next. It puts everything I just covered into a broader picture of what the transition from a condo to a house actually costs you. And if you want the 2 accounts set up, you'll find that link in the description below.